Welcome aboard, everyone, to another flight of Flightsim4Travel. Today we'll be traveling from Amsterdam Schiphol Airport to London's Heathrow Airport. So our flight number today will be KLM 1007. So we're leaving early in the morning and should be there in a little under an hour and a half. So sit back and enjoy the flight. Also today we're going to be starting something new. I'm going to be giving some history about the destination we're going to, so that being London. So I'll be talking a little bit about the history, a little bit some trivia about the city, and other interesting facts as we fly along. So during the cruise I'll be talking a lot about the history and maybe a little bit on the taxi. We have a long taxi out to the runway today, so that'll be coming to you shortly.
Operation complete. Set parking brake. Disconnecting tow. Stand by. Tow is disconnected and bypass pin has been removed. Hand signal will be on the left. We'll see you next time. Have a safe flight.
Located under the seat or between seats. The safety instruction card shows the exact location.
So the city of London is actually the capital of not just England, but of the country United Kingdom. It's among the oldest of the world's great cities. Its history spans almost 2 millennia, and it's one of Britain's largest cities. If you don't know, London is situated in the southeastern part of England, lying astride the River Thames. And Thames is spelled T-H-A-M-E-S. It looks like Thames, but it's pronounced Thames. The Thames River is 50 miles upstream from the estuary on the North Sea. Here's something interesting about London, that the city can be seen, if you looked at it from a satellite, to be in the middle of a green belt of open land, with its principal ring highway, the motorway, the M25, threaded around it at a radius about 20 miles from the city center. The growth of build-up area was halted by strict town planning controls in the mid-1950s. Its physical limits more or less correspond to the administrative and statistical boundaries separating the metropolitan county of Greater London from the home counties of Kent, Surrey, and Berkshire to the south of the river, and Buckinghamshire, Hertfordshire, and Essex to the north. The historic counties of Kent, Hertfordshire, and Essex extend an area beyond the current administrative counties with the same names to include substantial parts of the city-county of Greater London, which was formed in 1965. Most of Greater London south of the Thames belongs to the historic county of Surrey, while most of Greater London north of the Thames belongs historically to the county of Middlesex, area Greater London, which is 607 square miles. Historically, London grew from 3 district centers: the walled settlement, founded by the Romans on the banks of the Thames in the 1st century, today known as the City of London. The square mile, or simply the city, facing it across the bridge in the lower gravels to the south bank. The suburb of Southwark, and a mile upstream on the great southward bend of the river, is the city of Westminster. The 3 settlements had district and complementary roles. London, the city, developed as a center of trade, commerce, and banking. Southwark, the borough, became known for its monasteries, hospital, inns, fairs, pleasure houses, and the great theaters of Elizabethan London, such as the Rose, the Swan, and the world-famous Globe. Westminster grew up around an abbey, which brought a royal palace and its train, the entire central apparatus of the British state. Its legislature, executive, and judiciary. It also boasts spacious parks and the most fashionable districts for living and shopping, the West End. The population of London had crossed the 1 million mark by the year 1800. And a century later reached 6.5 million. During World War II, the evacuation and bombing was a turning point in London's history because they brought the long era of expansive suburbanization to a sudden end. After the war, the government decided that the metropolis had grown too much for its own economic and social good, and that its growth was a strategic risk. so the green belt was imposed, and subsequent growth was diverted beyond it. Finally, London's administrative boundaries are redrawn to incorporate almost the entire physical city, resulting in present-day Greater London.
Approaching 36 Center.
We'll continue with the information about London after we take off and get to some altitude.
On runway 36 Center.
A1 retain. Positive green. One thousand.
as we go.
We have an excellent team on board today, and we will have to offer any assistance you may require throughout the flight. Our in-flight entertainment has begun.
A little bit about the weather and climate in London. It's has some mild winters and temperate summers, so the average temperature is 52 degrees Fahrenheit, 11 degrees Celsius, and 42 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 degrees Celsius in January. And in July, 65 degrees Fahrenheit, 18 degrees. So average 52 degrees Fahrenheit, winter 42, summer 65. So my kind of weather. Statistics show that the sun actually shines in London 5 out of 6 days, even though it might be out briefly. We're just passing over the coastline from the Netherlands, and we're out over the English Channel now, as you can see from the map. We're going to fly straight across the channel towards the east coast of England. And our approach will be directly over the city of London. London's oldest highway is actually the Thames River. While opening the Westminster Bridge in 1750, London Bridge was the only crossing. Most journeys across the river and many trips within London were made by boat. Both banks were punctuated by stairs leading down to ferries. The Thames watermen, who had been regulated since the 14th century, formed their own guild or company by 1603. After the development of the railway, the river ceased to carry significant passenger traffic, despite periodic attempts to revive its functions as a mass transit artery with hydrofoils, catamarans, and hovercraft. A number of tunnels and bridges now cross the Thames River. basis of London's rail infrastructure was laid in 4 decades between 1836 and 1876. Competing railway companies brought 10 separate systems of track into London from every point of the compass, each with its own terminus station perched at the edge of the high-value city core and the West End. Linkage between the terminals was achieved by 1884 with the opening of the Metropolitan Railway, London's first underground. Early development of the Underground Railway in London was helped by the clay, which was easy to excavate. The spoil providing raw materials to make bricks for linings of tunnel walls. Improved deep tunneling techniques after World War I allowed a rapid expansion of the underground network, while the Piccadilly, Waterloo, Central, and Northern lines opened up hundreds of square miles of rural Middlesex and Essex for suburbanization. South of the Thames, a similarly dense network of railway stations was developed along the electric suburban lines of the Southern Railway out of Victoria, Waterloo, and London Bridge stations. Raised on handsome brick viaducts above the floodplain or sunk into cuttings through the rolling uplands, the covering railways form one of the most distinctive topographic features of South London. Together with the London Underground, or so-called the Tube, of the North, and the surface system of the South, equipped London with a network of lines and stations that rivaled only that of Tokyo for scale and density. Most of the network was already built and in service by 1939. In the second half of the 20th century, it only remained to fill in the gaps in the network map with projects such as the Heathrow extension of the Piccadilly line, the Jubilee line, the Victoria line, and the Docklands Light Railway. London's distinctive black taxicabs is a familiar feature on the city scene. The cabs and their drivers, the London cabbies, are products of a system of licensing that dates back to 1639. By about 1900, more than 11,000 registered cabs were plying for hire on the streets of London, and there were double that a century later. Motorized cabs first made their appearance in 1904 and soon displaced the horse-drawn unit. The last one survived actually until 1947. A regulation passed in 1906 required the new mechanical cabs to be designed in such a way that they could turn in the same tight circle as a two-wheeled hansom cab. Still in force, it accounts for the surprising maneuverability of black cabs in congested London streets and their distinctive sit-up and beg design. Cabbies themselves are subjected to even older regulations which require them to pass a detailed test on topography, street names, and principal destinations throughout a 6-mile radius from Charing Cross. Trainee taxi drivers, acquiring the knowledge as it's called, are a familiar sight on the streets of the capital. Patronage created the Royal Albert Hall, which every summer provides the setting for one of the world's greatest musical festivals, the Henry Wood Promenade Concerts, known popularly as the Proms. Municipal patronage first of the London County Council and later the Greater London Council turned the former industrial and warehousing land on the Waterloo River bank into the South Bank Arts Complex, which combines the Royal Festival Hall, Queen Elizabeth Hall, and Hayward Gallery. The National Film Theatre and the Royal National Theatre are also there. Nearby is the Imperial War Museum, the London Aquarium, and the very famous London Eye, which is the shape of a giant Ferris wheel. Well, it is a giant Ferris wheel. A little bit more about the history of London. Although excavations of West London have revealed the remains of circular huts dating back from before 2000 BC, the history of the city begins effectively with the Romans, beginning their occupation of Britain under Emperor Claudius in the year 43 AD. The Roman army soon gained control of much of the southeast of Britain. At a point just north of the marshy valley of the Thames, where two low hills were sited, they established Londinium, with a bridge giving access from land to the south. The first definitive mention of London refers to the year 60 AD and occurs in the work of the Roman historian Tacitus, who wrote of a celebrated center of commerce filled with traders. In that same year, Iceni tribesmen under Queen Boudica sacked the settlement. From traces of the fires, they said, it can be determined that the city had already begun to spread across the Walbrook Valley towards the hill where St. Paul's Cathedral was later built. After the sack, the city was reconstructed, including a great basilica, an aisled hall 500 feet long. On the same spot today stands Leadenhall Market, an 1881 creation of cast iron and glass. To protect the city, Cripplegate Fort was built by the end of the 1st century with an amphitheater nearby. The first half of the 2nd century was a prosperous time, but the fortunes of Londinium changed about the year 150 AD, and areas of housing and workshops were demolished. A landward wall was built about 200 AD for the defense of the city. Remains of this wall can still be seen at the edge of the Barbican near the street called London Wall and on Tower Hill. In medieval times, the walls were rebuilt and extended, requiring new gateways in addition to the 6 Roman ones. During the 3rd century, timber quays along the Thames and public buildings were rebuilt, and the riverside wall was constructed. Londinium in the 3rd and 4th centuries was less populous than in the year 125 AD. When the legions were recalled to Rome early in the 5th century, there was widespread abandonment of the property, and what happened to London over the next 2 centuries is a matter of conjecture. No records tell how or when London fell into Saxon hands, but it was still, or had once again become a great city of importance by 597 when Pope Gregory I the Great sent St. Augustine to England from Rome. Ethelbert I, King of Kent, founded St. Paul's Cathedral, and Mellitus was installed as the bishop there in 604. By the late 7th century, London emerged again as a major trading city. The city's future importance as a center of financial and military significance really came into its own about the time of the Norman conquest in 1066. One of the first acts of William the Conqueror was to accord a charter promising the citizens of London that they should enjoy the same laws as under Edward the Confessor, and that he would suffer no one to do them wrong. Just outside the city's walls, he established the Norman Keep, or the White Tower, which was the center stronghold of the fortress castle, which became known as the Tower of London. A roughly square structure, the White Tower is 90 feet tall, with a tower at each corner of the walls. In the late 12th century, King Richard I returned for the Third Crusade with a new conception of fortification. He began surrounding the keep with concentric systems of curtain walls with the towers at intervals. Project completed by Henry III in the years between 1216 and 1272. Because virtually every reign since has then added its contribution, the tower incorporates architecture from many periods. It was the official royal residence through the reign of James I in the early 17th century. It also housed the Royal Mint, the Royal Menagerie, the public records, an observatory, an arsenal, and a prison. Some executions took place within the confines of the tower, but most were carried out on Tower Hill just beyond. The crown jewels are now on display at the tower as a superb collection of arms and armor. The Norman kings selected Westminster as the site for their permanent residence and government. Edward the Confessor, who ruled from 1042 to 1066, constructed an enormous church dedicated to St. Peter, and later referred to it as Westminster Abbey, as well as a royal palace. The ancient city of London, meanwhile, reestablished its role as a center of trade. In 1085, London had between 10,000 and 15,000 inhabitants, less than 2% of England's population. And it was the largest city in Europe, north of the Alps, at that time. In 1087, a major fire destroyed many of the city's wooden houses and St. Paul's. In the rebuilding, houses of stone and tile began to appear, and some streets were partially cleansed by introducing open sewers and conduits. But wooden houses remained the norm. In the year 1300, London had about 80,000 inhabitants that were provisioned by a food supply network extending 40 to 60 miles into the surrounding countryside. In the year 1348 to 1349, the city's expansion came to a sudden stop with the outbreak of the Black Death, which was spreading across Europe at that time. Londoners were being buried beyond the city walls at West Smithfield. By 1520, London was again enjoying prosperity with 41 halls of craft guilds symbolizing that well-being. Toward the middle of the 16th century, London underwent an important growth in trade, which was boosted by the establishment of monopolies such as those held by the Muscovy Company, the Turkey Company, and the East India Company. It also grew in population, with the number of Londoners increasing from over 100,000 in 1550 to 200,000 in 1600. The famous King Henry VIII in 1529 began to convert Cardinal Wolsey's York Palace into the Royal Palace of Whitehall and to build St. James's Palace across the fields. The city of Westminster began to take more definite shape around the court. Between Westminster and the City of London, the great houses of the nobles began to be built, with gardens down to the river, and each with its own water gate. Along the Strand, opposite these houses, were distinguished lodgings for gentlemen who were in town during legal sittings. And by the early 17th century, the name London began to embrace both the City of London and the City of Westminster, as well as the built-up land between them. But the two never merged into a single municipality. During the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, 1558 to 1603, arguably marked the apogee of the city's domination of England. The Queen based her strength on its militia, its money, and its love for its country. It provided 1/4 of the men for service abroad in 1585 and formed its armed trained bands to defend England against the threatened Spanish invasion. The train bands remained a force to be reckoned with, and Charles I, who had damaged the city's trading interests and flouted its privileges cavalierly as he had parliaments, was deterred from attacking London in 1642 by their presence during the Durham Green. Hostility toward the king made the fortified city the core of parliamentary support, and Parliament's success in the civil wars was due in good part to the city's allegiance. In 1630, the 4th Earl of Bedford began developing Covent Gardens, originally the convent garden of the Benedictines of Westminster, therefore initiating the process of building estates of townhouses on land acquired from the former religious houses. In 1664 and 65, the plague again visited the city. It had been a frequent visitor since the Black Death of 1348, and it killed about 70,000 Londoners. The previous outbreak in 1603 had killed at least 25,000. Then, in 1666, the Great Fire of London burned from September 2nd to September 5th and consumed 5/6 of the city. St. Paul's Cathedral, 87 parish churches, and at least 13,000 dwellings were destroyed during the fire, but there were only a few human fatalities. From the unscorched corners in the northeast and the extreme west, a rebuilding began. Because the reconstruction had to be undertaken rapidly, adoption of rational street plan was rejected, but the old streets were made wider and a bit straighter. Because many of the tiny parishes were combined and few churches had escaped the fire, only about 50 churches were rebuilt. In addition to the new St. Paul's, Sir Christopher Wren, mathematician, astronomer, and physicist, though only informally trained as an architect, was given the formidable task of designing them and supervising their construction. 1820, when George IV succeeded the throne, many of the villages and hamlets that in the 17th and 18th centuries had been destinations of summer outings from the heart of the city had been covered by a tide of bricks and mortar. Some of the buildings was the well-planned work of the great landowners. Some, however, was the sorry work of smaller, greedy. The Bedford, Portman, and Grosvenor estates laid out on land that had passed from the monasteries into hands of noble families, streets and squares that embellished the western part of the town. Socially, commercially, and financially, London was the hub of the kingdom. It was also the center of the world economy from the late 18th century to 1914, having taken over the role from Amsterdam. As a corollary to its great wealth, fed by the profits of trade with the East and West Indies and with the Americas, indeed with most of the world, it reigned supreme in matters also of theater, literature, and the arts. London experienced important growth throughout the 19th century, with its total population exceeding 2.6 million in 1851. The year of the Great Exhibition staged at the Crystal Palace to celebrate the commercial might of Britain and its empire. 50 years later, London's population reached 6.5 million, and the city housed 1/5 of the population of England and Wales. London suffered widespread damage during World War II as a result of the aerial bombing by the Germans, which devastated the docks and many industrial, residential, and commercial districts, including the historical heart of the city. About 30,000 Londoners died because of the enemy action in the skies above the capital, and a further 50,000 were injured. The end of the war brought a return of evacuees, and reconstruction of the city began at once, even though building materials were desperately short supply. During the war, the Greater London Plan, in 1944, had been prepared as a blueprint for reconstruction, and also for relocating some Londoners and their jobs in new towns around the capital, and in assisted areas in parts of the English provinces. Construction of new housing was scourged and tightly controlled in a green belt around London, and the subsequent dispersed growth of the metropolis occurred in more distant sections of southeastern England. The Port of London, which had been devastated during World War II, was restored in the 1950s. However, between 1968 and 1981, the city docks were closed to traffic because of their small size, difficult labor relations, poor management, and powerful competition from major ports in continental Europe, especially Europort and Rotterdam. In the 1980s, the London Docklands Development Corporation encouraged major changes in docklands, in the construction of new housing and large number of new offices, notably the Canary Wharf. London had experienced substantial deindustrialization by this time, and the old industries that had been installed in Victorian times collapsed. Many newer industries dating from the inter-years and located along radiating main roads laid out of those decades, sharing the same fate. A great view of our sim version of London, and if you look to the right you can see Westminster, and you can see the London Eye, that giant Ferris wheel there just to the center right on the Thames. Also, if you look towards the center, you can see, I'm trying to zoom in, you can see Tower Bridge. So a lot of people think Tower Bridge is London Bridge, but that's actually Tower Bridge because it's located next to the Tower of London. The original London Bridge, I believe, is in Arizona. And so there is a new London Bridge downriver from Tower Bridge. In 2005, London was selected as the host of the 2012 Olympic Games. The Olympic Games in 2012 were considered a resounding success. A large, generally sell-out crowd attended almost every event, beginning with the spectacular opening ceremony on July 27th in the newly built stadium in a previously derelict area of East London. That year was the 60th anniversary of Queen Elizabeth II's rule, and many of the festive events surrounding the Diamond Jubilee were celebrated in London. bit about London fog. For years, London was synonymous with smog. The word coined at the turn of the 20th century described the city's characteristic blend of fog and smoke. The capital's peace supers were caused by suspended pollution of smoke and sulfur dioxide from the coal fires. The most severely affected area was the 19th century residential and industrial belt of the inner London area, particularly the East End, which had the highest density of factory smokestacks and domestic chimney pots, and the lowest lying land, inhibiting dispersal. As recently as the early as the 1960s, the smokier districts of East Inner London experienced a 30% reduction in winter sunshine hours. The problem has been alleviated by parliamentary legislation under their Clean Air Acts in 1956 and 1968, outlawing the burning of coal, combined with the clearance of older housing and the loss of manufacturing. Flooding has always been a concern in London. Its waters have been rising at a rate of 2.8 feet per century. The record floods of 1791 reached a height of 14 feet above the fixed measuring point. Flood risks come from a combination of factors. All southeastern Britain is slowly being tilted down into the sea from the Hebrides tilted up by tectonic movements, plates moving, resulting from the melting of the Pleistocene ice sheets. London is sinking faster than the remainder of the region because water is extracted from the chalk aquifer, thus gradually drying up the underlying beds of clay. In addition, the tidal rhythm of the Thames has been amplified by dredging for navigation and by the embankment of its estuary marshes for cultivation. The Metropolitan Police Force in London was founded by Home Secretary Robert Peel in 1829 and remains accountable to his successor, not to the local councillors. By 1900, the Metropolitan Police District, which inherited responsibility for patrols against highwaymen, extended into the countryside in a 20-mile radius around London. Subsequently increased slightly, the jurisdictional area is large enough to accommodate the entire metropolis and some of the rural fringe.
1,000 feet, stabilize, Mr. Bird, channel seat 7.
Approaching 27 right.
Approaching minimums. 100. Minimums. 50. 40. 30. 20. 10.
Welcome to London and Heathrow Airport. So our simulator right now is showing a fairly vacant airport. Normally this airport would be as busy as JFK or Glen Hartsfield or Chicago O'Hare, so it's normally a very busy airport. I saw a couple of some aircraft here on the ground, but this particular scenery doesn't model a lot of aircraft at the gates. Also, the time that I'm doing this flight is actually 6 hours off from the actual time, so it's actually the middle of the night in London, so traffic is a little lighter, but it still would be busier than this. Just a couple more little bits of trivia about London. The theatre district, West End, is quite famous. You could pretty much see any of the major shows like you would see in New York City and Broadway. Of course, this all started with Shakespeare, during Shakespeare's time, the very famous Globe Theater. Although the original is long lost to fire, there is a rebuilt one in the same style and spirit of the original Globe, and you could go there and see Shakespeare perform. So I hope you enjoyed this third Flightsim4Travel stream. I hope you enjoyed the added information, the descriptions of trivia and history about the destination. If you like this, please leave a comment or that you like it, or if you'd prefer just the music, and let me know, and I could try to change the videos to be more enjoyable. As usual, once we park here, we will roll back and do some replays of my landing, and I think it was a pretty good one. If you liked the video and want to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And if you liked the video, please smash down that like button. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope to see you again on a future Flightsim4Travel flight. Enjoy the replays.